Hey everyone, welcome back to Blush and Blood, where we get into the stories that stay with you long after the lights go out. Today we are covering the case of Brittanee Drexel, a 17-year-old girl from Rochester, New York, who traveled to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in the spring of 2009 and never came home. This case took 13 years to solve. 13 years of a mother not knowing what happened to her child. And when the truth finally came out, it was as horrific as any of us could have feared. So let's get into it. Grab your coffee, settle in, and let's talk about Brittanee. Underscore 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 underscore. Brittanee Marie Drexel was born on October 7, 1991, in Rochester, New York. Her parents, John and Dawn, were not married at the time of her birth, and they separated not long after she was born. Dawn went on to remarry a man named Chad Drexel, who adopted Brittanee and raised her as his own. Chad had served in the military, and after completing his service, the family settled in a suburb of Rochester called Chile. Brittanee grew up in a tight-knit household. She had a younger brother named Camden and a sister named Marissa, and by all accounts, the three of them were genuinely close. Family time was important to Brittanee. She loved being around the people she cared about. Outside of home, she was social, energetic, and full of personality. She played soccer. She loved shopping. She had an eye condition that had left her blind in one eye, but she never let it slow her down or define how she moved through the world. Everyone who knew her said she was lively and vivacious, the kind of person who lights up a room without even trying. She attended Gates Chile High School and had big dreams: modeling, becoming an OB nurse, getting married, starting a family. The kind of dreams that feel very specific and very real when you are 17. And she was 17. Just 17 years old when everything changed. Underscore 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 underscore. In the spring of 2009, Brittanee started asking her mom if she could go to Myrtle Beach for spring break. Myrtle Beach is one of those places that becomes an unofficial gathering point for young people every spring, especially in the northeastern United States. Kids from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they flood down there every year. It's a party destination. It's loud and crowded and exciting, and if you're 17 and all your friends are talking about it, of course you want to go. But Dawn said no. And honestly, Dawn's reasoning makes complete sense. She didn't know the friends Brittanee was planning to go with. There would be no parental supervision. And everyone knows what spring break looks like: a lot of drinking, a lot of chaos, a lot of situations where things can go sideways very fast. As a mother, her instinct was to protect her daughter. The two of them got into a major argument over it. Brittanee was devastated. When you're 17, something like this feels enormous. Being left out of something your entire friend group is doing feels like the end of the world. And on top of that, Brittanee was already going through a hard stretch at home. Her parents were in the middle of a divorce, and the family was losing their house. Things were stressful and uncertain, and this felt like one more thing being taken from her. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Brittanee could go stay at a friend's house for a few nights over spring break. Not Myrtle Beach, just a sleepover, in Rochester, with adult supervision. Dawn could live with that. She felt like her daughter was safe. Underscore 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 underscore. Brittanee left for a friend's house on April 22. She and Dawn stayed in constant communication, texting, calling, Brittanee sending regular updates and check-ins. Everything seemed fine. What Dawn didn't know was that none of it was true. Brittanee had gone to Myrtle Beach. She had driven over 800 miles, roughly 1,300 kilometers, from Rochester to South Carolina with 3 friends, Jennifer, Philip, and Alana. She had lied about the sleepover. She had lied in every single update she sent her mom. Teenagers do reckless things. They push limits. They believe nothing bad will happen to them. That's not a character flaw specific to Brittanee, that's just being 17. But what was happening in Myrtle Beach made her vulnerability much, much greater than she realized. The friends she had gone with were all older than her. And because of that age gap, they were going to clubs and bars and venues that Brittanee simply couldn't get into. So while they were out, she was largely on her own. Left to figure out her own time in an unfamiliar city, 800 miles from home, with no one watching out for her. I cannot stress this enough, if you are going somewhere like spring break, or a festival, or any kind of trip where there's drinking and crowded public spaces and strangers everywhere, you do not leave your people behind. You just don't. Whatever the age difference, whatever the circumstances, you look out for each other. You do not leave someone alone in that environment and call it fine. Underscore 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 underscore. On April 25th, Dawn received a phone call from Brittanee's boyfriend, John Greco. He told her that Brittanee was in Myrtle Beach, and that nobody knew where she was. Let that land for a second. In one phone call, Dawn went from believing her daughter was safely asleep at a friend's house in the same state, to learning that she was 800 miles away and missing. The whiplash of that must have been completely disorienting and terrifying. Dawn immediately called Brittanee's stepdad Chad, and then called the Rochester Police Department. Since Brittanee had gone missing in South Carolina, Rochester PD had limited jurisdiction, so Dawn reached out to Myrtle Beach Police directly. Their initial response was dismissive. They suggested Brittanee had probably just run away. You know how spring break is. She'll turn up. They didn't even want to file a missing persons report at first. How many times do we hear this? How many cases have we covered where a young woman goes missing and the first assumption is that she's a runaway, that she made a choice, that she'll come back on her own? Dawn had to push hard to get them to take the report seriously. She had to convince them that this was not her daughter's character, that something was genuinely wrong. Eventually Myrtle Beach police did agree to file the report, but they classified Brittanee as an endangered runaway. Meanwhile, John had been texting Brittanee constantly throughout the day. They had been in near constant communication, and then at some point she just stopped responding. For someone who was always on her phone, always texting back, going silent was jarring. He reached out to her friends. Nobody had heard from her. Nobody could get a response. When he called and her phone just rang out endlessly, he started leaving voicemails, and those voicemails are genuinely difficult to listen to. Brittanee, I don't even know what to say right now. If you're there, I would appreciate you calling back. Hopefully you're not with that guy. What did you do this for? If you're being attacked, I know you've got it. Okay. I love you. Bye. You need to answer my calls to let me know you're okay. Why won't you answer the phone? Please call me back. And then, at some point, her phone stopped receiving calls altogether. It was as though the phone had been turned off, or had died. And that was the moment Dawn knew, in her gut, that something was seriousseriously underscore 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 underscore. The following day, Dawn, Brittanee's grandparents, her boyfriend John, and her best friend Tara all drove down to Myrtle Beach. That's a 13-hour drive. They made it as quickly as they could, because what else do? You go. You show up. You do whatever you can to find your person. When they arrived, they went to the police to get updates on the investigation, and they also went to local news stations. Dawn was already thinking about media coverage, about keeping Brittanee's name and face in front of people, about making sure that anyone who might have seen something new to come forward. They walked up and down the main drag of Myrtle Beach handing out flyers. Police had already begun their investigation by going to the hotel where Brittanee had been staying, the Bay Harbor Hotel. When they searched her room, something immediately stood out. All of her clothes were still there. Her purse and her phone were missing, but everything else, all of her belongings, were right where she had left them. That detail is significant. If Brittanee had simply decided to leave, to run away somewhere, she would have taken her things. You don't leave all your clothes behind. The fact that her room looked untouched shifted the investigation. Even the officers who had initially leaned toward the runaway theory had to acknowledge that this didn't look like someone who had chosen to disappear. Police interviewed the friends she had traveled with, and relatively early in the investigation, all three of them were ruled out as suspects. They appeared to have no involvement in whatever happened to Brittanee. Underscore 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 underscore. This is where the CCTV footage becomes crucial. Police were able to piece together a timeline of Brittanee's movements on the night she disappeared. Earlier that day, she had been at the beach and ran into a guy named Peter Brozowitz, a 20-year-old nightclub promoter from Rochester who was also in Myrtle Beach for spring break. They knew each other from back home, though not particularly well. They said hello and went their separate ways. Later that evening, Peter texted her to let her know she had left her flip-flops at some point during their earlier run-in, and they agreed to meet up so she could get them back. Brittanee left her hotel around 8 p.m. She walked to Peter's hotel, the Blue Water Resort, about 1.4 miles, or roughly 2.3 kilometers, away along Ocean Boulevard, which is the main stretch of Myrtle Beach. CCTV captured her walking toward the resort at 8:07 p.m. and arriving at 8:33 p.m. She was there for about 15 minutes. She picked up her flip-flops and left at 8:48 p.m. She then started walking back to her hotel. During that walk, she was texting John. They were having a somewhat heated back and forth about one of the girls she had traveled with. She was venting. She was a little worked up. Normal teenage drama. The last text she sent to John was at 8:58 p.m. After that, nothing. It's an almost impossible thing to wrap your head around. She was on Ocean Boulevard during spring break, one of the busiest, most populated stretches of road in Myrtle Beach at one of the most crowded times of year. There should have been people everywhere. And still, somewhere between 8:58 p.m. and whenever someone would have noticed her gone, Brittanee Drexel vanished. Police questioned Peter extensively. He was, after all, the last confirmed person to have seen her. But he was cleared. His account checked out. He simply happened to be someone who saw her that evening. Underscore 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 underscore. What gave investigators their most significant lead wasn't a witness, it was cell phone tower data. By analyzing the pings from Brittanee's phone, police were able to determine that she was still moving along Ocean Boulevard from 8:48 p.m. until around 9 p.m. And then, just after 9 p.m., something changed dramatically. Her phone's movement speed went from a walking pace to approximately 55 miles per hour, about 88 kilometers per hour. She had gotten into a car. The phone continued moving at that speed, heading south, for roughly 50 miles, about 80 kilometers. And then it stopped. Its final signal came from a remote area along the Georgetown and Charleston County line. The first ping from that location was at 10:18 p.m., suggesting that's when she arrived there. The last ping was at 11:57 p.m., presumably when the phone's battery finally died. The area where the phone went silent was not somewhere you end up by accident. It was remote. It was isolated. It was alligator-infested swampland. This was not a place someone brings a 17-year-old girl with good intentions. Police from both Myrtle Beach and Georgetown County launched a search of the area. They used boats, ground-penetrating radar, helicopters, K-9 units. Search teams of sometimes 200 to 500 people at a time. They searched for days straight, sunup to sundown. They found nothing. Underscore 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 underscore. While law enforcement searched, Dawn was doing everything in her power on her end. She stayed in Myrtle Beach for 2 full months after Brittanee's disappearance. She spoke to the media relentlessly. She appeared on local and national television. She kept Brittanee's name in front of the public. One of her earliest and most consistent theories was that Brittanee had been the victim of human trafficking. The Myrtle Beach police were skeptical of this. South Carolina has historically had lower rates of human trafficking compared to other states, and local law enforcement tended to discount that theory. But Dawn kept pushing it. She and Chad appeared on Dr. Phil in 2009, and again in 2016. In that first appearance, there was a tense confrontation between Dawn and Peter Brozowitz. Dawn wasn't necessarily accusing him of being involved in Brittanee's disappearance, more so expressing her frustration that he had let a 17-year-old girl walk alone at night rather than making sure she got back safely. Peter defended himself by saying he wasn't there to babysit anyone, that he barely knew Brittanee, that there were other friends she was traveling with. The exchange was heated, raw, and very, very human. Two people processing grief and guilt in completely different ways. What's worth noting is that Myrtle Beach, despite its spring break reputation as a fun destination, had a violent crime rate in 2009 that was reportedly 3 times the national average. The alcohol and the crowds and the chaos of the season created an environment where dangerous things happened. Underscore 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 underscore. In 2011, 2 years after Brittanee's disappearance, police received a tip that would eventually, years later, lead to the truth. A woman contacted police with concerns that her father might have been involved in the case. Her father's name was Raymond Moody. Raymond was a Tier 3 registered sex offender, the highest risk classification, reserved for those convicted of the most serious and violent sexual offenses, requiring strict lifetime registration requirements with law enforcement. The woman had spoken with Raymond's ex-boyfriend, a man named Ernie Merchant, who told her that he believed Raymond might have had something to do with Brittanee's disappearance. Police reached out to Ernie, and what he shared with them was deeply unsettling. Ernie and Raymond had been in a relationship that ended when Ernie discovered Raymond was having an affair with a woman named Angel Voss. The dynamic between the three of them was strange. Even after the breakup, Ernie allowed Raymond continued access to a woodshop on his property, so they stayed loosely in contact. One day, while Raymond was at Ernie's place using the woodshop, Ernie received a phone call from Angel. She was drunk, or high, or both, agitated and fired up. She told Ernie she wanted Raymond out of his house immediately. And then she said something that stopped Ernie cold. "I know things. I will send us both to prison before I let him go." When Ernie asked what she meant, she said, "That girl." She wouldn't specify who she was talking about. She wouldn't elaborate. But Ernie was convinced she was talking about Brittanee Drexel. Police asked Ernie to wear a wire and try to draw a confession out of Raymond. Ernie refused. He had already confronted Raymond about it, and Raymond had denied everything. Ernie was scared, not unreasonably. Raymond was not someone you wanted to push. Underscore 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 underscore. Since Raymond was a Tier 3 sex offender, he was required to check in with police every 3 months. When Georgetown police used one of those scheduled check-ins to ask him about Brittanee's case, his reaction was immediate and alarming. He became furious. He was aggressive, confrontational, and told them in no uncertain terms to back off. He was hostile in a way that did not read as the behavior of someone with nothing to hide. Police later discovered that Raymond had been staying at the Sunset Lodge Motel at the time of Brittanee's disappearance, and that motel was extremely close to the area where Brittanee's phone had last pinged. They executed a search warrant on the room he had lived in. They took carpet samples, wall sections, anything that could potentially still hold forensic evidence years after the fact. The search turned up nothing. Raymond remained a person of interest, but without hard evidence, police couldn't move forward. Their hands were tied. Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, between 2011 and 2012, police received information from a jailhouse informant that would derail the investigation for years. His name was Taquan Brown, and he told investigators that he had personally witnessed Brittanee being sexually assaulted and murdered in a stash house in McClellanville, a small coastal town not far from where Brittanee's phone had last pinged, by a 16-year-old named Timothy Deshaun Taylor. This information wasn't made public until 2016, when the FBI held a press conference presenting a new working theory, that Brittanee had been murdered. They also announced a $25,000 reward for any information leading to a resolution. Taquan Brown's account was partially corroborated by a second, unidentified informant who also implicated Timothy Taylor in the crime. The story went that Timothy had picked Brittanee up in Myrtle Beach, driven her to the stash house, and that Timothy's father, a man named Sean Taylor, had been present and had shot Brittanee. An FBI agent later stated in court that multiple witnesses had described Brittanee's body being placed in a pit, described as an alligator pit, to have her remains disposed of. Interestingly, there was already a Sean Taylor connection in the case. In July 2010, a woman had reported that 3 men attempted to abduct her on South Ocean Boulevard, very close to where Brittanee disappeared from, pulling up in a van and grabbing at her before she managed to escape. She was able to provide descriptions, police assembled a lineup, and she identified a man named Sean Taylor. But Sean Taylor had CCTV footage placing him at a restaurant 30 minutes away at the time of the alleged abduction, so his charges were dropped. Now, years later, a Sean Taylor was back in the picture, this time as the father of someone allegedly involved in Brittanee's murder. Based on Taquan's testimony, investigators spent years pursuing Timothy Taylor as their primary suspect. There were canine searches, excavation searches. Enormous amounts of investigative resources and time poured into this direction. Timothy had been convicted of an unrelated crime. He was the getaway driver in a 2011 McDonald's robbery in which one of his accomplices shot an employee. In August 2016, at a federal hearing related to that case, an FBI agent raised Brittanee's case and argued Timothy should not be released pending trial because of the risk he posed to the community. Despite those arguments, Timothy was released on a $10,000 bail. Over the next 6 years, Timothy Taylor and his entire family received death threats. They were ostracized from their community. Their lives were effectively destroyed by the cloud of suspicion hanging over them. And then, Taquan Brown's story fell apart. Investigators found significant inconsistencies in his account. His testimony came into question in a serious way. Timothy Taylor has never been charged in connection with Brittanee's case, and the overwhelming evidence is that Taquan Brown either fabricated the story entirely or was catastrophically wrong in what he claimed to have witnessed. If he made it up, and the weight of the evidence suggests he did, what he did was unconscionable. He wasted years of investigative resources. He gave a grieving family what felt like a possible answer and then snatched it away. He destroyed an innocent man's life. And all the while, Raymond Moody, the man who actually killed Brittanee, sat watching it all unfold from the outside. We'll get to what Moody himself said about that. It will make your stomach turn. Timothy Taylor did later file a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Justice for emotional distress and related harm caused by what he endured during those years. That case was dismissed by a federal judge in 2025. Underscore 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 underscore. In 2019, a new team of FBI agents took over the investigation. They went back to the beginning, back through everything, with fresh perspectives and, crucially, technology that hadn't existed a decade earlier. Reanalyzing the cell phone tower data with updated tools, they were able to narrow down the 1-minute window in which Brittanee's movement shifted from walking speed to 55 miles per hour. They knew almost exactly when she got into that car. They also went back to the surveillance footage from Ocean Boulevard on the night of April 25, 2009. Footage that had been reviewed before, but never with the visual enhancement capabilities available in 2019. And this time, when they looked at that 1-minute window during which Brittanee's phone went from walking pace to vehicle speed, they saw something. A Ford Explorer, driving the exact route Brittanee had been walking along. That Ford Explorer matched the description of a vehicle Raymond Moody had been known to drive in 2009. The footage wasn't crisp enough to make out who was inside the car. But you could see there were two people. And investigators believed those two people were Raymond Moody and his girlfriend, Angel Voss. The presence of Moody's car in that exact location at that exact moment was enough to bring him back into sharp focus. Underscore 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 underscore. Over the next few years, investigators worked methodically to build something they could actually take to a courtroom. On April 27, 2022, Angel Voss was brought in for a formal interview. She had been interviewed once before, back in 2011. In that first interview, she had told police that Raymond was abusive, and that he had, at times, expressed disturbing thoughts, including dreams about murdering people. In 2022, her entire demeanor had shifted. She was defensive of Raymond. She told investigators he had absolutely nothing to do with Brittanee's disappearance. She denied being in a car with Brittanee at any point. When investigators directly asked if she had any involvement in the disappearance, she said no. Firmly, categorically no. At the end of the interview, she agreed to cooperate. Then she walked out and never followed through. That night, pending a warrant, FBI agents surveilled the house where Raymond and Angel were living and observed what they described as suspicious activity. The following day, law enforcement executed a search warrant on the property. They seized phones, storage devices, and a disposable camera. They also managed to speak with Raymond, who agreed to come in for a formal interview. And then, 5 days later, on May 4, 2022, Raymond Moody walked forward and confessed. He admitted to kidnapping, raping, and murdering Brittanee Drexel, and to disposing of her remains. Underscore 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 underscore. Following his admission, he was arrested on an obstruction of justice charge. The next day, he sat down for a more detailed formal interview. He was potentially facing the death penalty, which meant he had very little negotiating leverage and significant incentive to cooperate. His initial version of events went like this. He and Angel were parked on the side of the road smoking marijuana. Brittanee walked past. He offered to let her smoke with them, and she agreed and got into the car voluntarily. They drove her to a location known as the Pole Yard at a boat ramp, about an hour from Myrtle Beach, approximately 45 miles, or 70 kilometers, away. Angel then left Raymond and Brittanee there alone. He claimed he hoped to have consensual sex with Brittanee, but when she refused his advances, he raped her. Afraid of going to prison for what he had done, he then decided to kill her. When Angel returned later that night, he told her that some friends of Brittanee's had come and picked her up. Brittanee wasn't there anymore. He disposed of her body approximately 12 miles, or about 20 kilometers, away later that night. Before he agreed to lead investigators to the location where he had buried her, Moody tried to negotiate something remarkable. He wanted a deal in which Angel would not be prosecuted for any role she had in the crime. He was willing to take full responsibility, but only if she was protected. That request alone told investigators a great deal about Angel's level of involvement. On May 11, 2022, following his directions to the location where he said he had disposed of Brittanee's remains, investigators recovered human remains. Those remains were later confirmed to be Brittanee Drexel. That same day, Angel finally signed a formal statement acknowledging that she was present on the night Brittanee was kidnapped, raped, and killed. She agreed to cooperate with investigators and to testify at Raymond's trial. She corroborated the story about the marijuana that Moody had pulled over, called out to Brittanee through the window, offered to let her smoke with them, and she had gotten in. Prosecutors weren't buying the story that Brittanee had gotten into the car willingly of her own free will. They believed she had been lured in, whether through charm, a false sense of safety, or a deliberate deception. And the evidence of premeditation, specifically that a tent had been set up at the boat ramp before they drove out there, supported the theory that this was not spontaneous. Underscore 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 underscore. On October 19, 2022, more than 13 years after Brittanee Drexel disappeared on a warm spring night in Myrtle Beach, Raymond Moody stood in a courtroom and pled guilty to murder, kidnapping, and criminal sexual conduct. The trial, because of the guilty plea, was relatively straightforward in its mechanics. Evidence was presented: text messages, cell phone tower records, surveillance footage, the confession itself, the discovery of the remains. All of it laid out. Moody was given the opportunity to speak. He said, "I was a monster. I was a monster then, and I was a monster when I took Brittanee Drexel's life. I don't have the words to express how horrible I feel. I'm very sorry. I'll be honest with you, I don't believe a word of it. Not because I think remorse is impossible, but because this man is a Tier 3 sex offender. He has been in legal systems before. He knows what to say. He knows what sounds right. And more importantly, we know what he did while police were investigating the jailhouse informant's false story about Timothy Taylor. We know what he said about that later. The victim impact statements were devastating. Dawn stood up in that courtroom and said, 'Today, we know the truth. And today, Mr. Moody, you face the consequences for that.' Brittanee is present. I wear her picture and her ashes around my neck. That's all I have left. That's all we have left after what you did to her." Raymond Moody was sentenced to life in prison for murder, plus 30 years for kidnapping, and 30 more years for criminal sexual conduct. Angel Voss later pled guilty to making false statements to federal agents and was sentenced to 18 years in prison for her role in obstructing the investigation over the course of more than a decade. Dawn subsequently filed a civil lawsuit against Raymond Moody. After 2 days of proceedings, the jury awarded her $700 million. Moody will almost certainly never pay anything close to that figure. But the civil case matters. It creates a legal foundation to pursue any assets connected to him, any property, anything that could be seized. And perhaps more importantly, it sent a message. Dawn's attorney put it plainly after the verdict: "I think he's very sorry that he got caught. He watched this unfold on TV and on billboards up and down the highway for 13 years and said nothing. Underscore 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 underscore. In 2024, following his conviction, Moody provided investigators with what he described as a more complete and truthful account of what actually happened the night Brittanee was taken. According to this version, he and Angel had been deliberately hunting for a girl that night. When Brittanee walked past them, they lured her into the car by pretending to be tourists who were lost and needed directions, offering to drop her off at her hotel in exchange for help. Once Brittanee was in the car, he handed the wheel to Angel and physically restrained Brittanee in the back seat while Angel drove them to the boat ramp. When they arrived at the tent he had set up there, Angel left, supposedly to retrieve some keys. Before she went, Moody claimed that Angel told him not to do anything until she got back. When Angel returned, he left Brittanee with her while he went back to the house to get other items. When he returned, he raped Brittanee inside the tent while Angel was present. He said Angel was not involved in the rape, but she was there. He then strangled Brittanee with a rope while Angel watched. He followed that by stabbing her in the heart with an ice pick. He rolled her body in a blanket or sleeping bag, put her in the trunk of the car, and drove back to the house. He and Angel went inside and slept for a while, with Brittanee's body in the trunk of the car parked outside, before he eventually got up, disposed of her remains alone, and began getting rid of the evidence: the ice pick, personal items belonging to Brittanee, anything tying him to what he had done. He held onto the ice pick for some time. When the case started getting media attention and law enforcement started circling him, he got paranoid and eventually threw it into a pond. He also revealed that after Angel's 2022 police interview, he had coached her on what to say if investigators came back to her. He told her to say that when she returned to the tent, Brittanee was already gone, that some friends had come and taken her. And then the detail that I genuinely could not believe when I came across it. He admitted that when the investigation was focused on Timothy Taylor, the innocent man who was having his life destroyed by Taquan Brown's false accusations, Moody had been watching it all. And he said he had hoped Timothy would get convicted for it. That if Timothy went down for the crime, no one would ever come looking for Moody. He'd be free. And Brittanee's case would be solved. There is no remorse in that statement. None. There is only a predator who spent 13 years watching an innocent family get obliterated by accusations his crime created, and who openly wished for that innocent man to spend his life in prison instead of him. His attorney at the civil trial also noted that part of the reason for the updated confession in 2024 may have been strategic. Moody was 65 years old at the time, and some legal analysts suggested that by providing a more complete account and showing some degree of cooperation, he may have been attempting to preserve some of his assets for his grandchildren, rather than having everything seized by the civil judgment in favor of Dawn. So even the truth came with strings attached. Underscore 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 underscore. I want to sit with that number for a moment. 13 years. For 13 years, Dawn did not know what happened to her daughter. She moved to Myrtle Beach in 2014, 5 years in, so she could be closer to the investigation, closer to the area where Brittanee disappeared, closer to the possibility that something might break. Her parents followed her there. They built their lives around the search for answers they didn't have. For 13 years, the case went cold, then hot, then cold again. They chased a jailhouse informant's story for years, poured resources into it, only to have it crumble. A completely innocent young man had his life derailed because of it. And the entire time, Raymond Moody, a known, registered, Tier 3 sex offender, was right there. He had been a person of interest since 2011. His car was on the surveillance footage. He had been staying near where Brittanee's phone last pinged. And still, it took until 2022 for him to confess. It's hard not to feel the weight of all the time that was wasted. And it is genuinely heartbreaking that solving the case came down to a confession, that the technology and persistence of a new investigative team were what finally cornered him. Because he had 13 years where he could have come forward. 13 years where Dawn didn't know. And he chose silence every single day of them. Underscore 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 underscore. There's a lot to take from this case, and I want to be careful about how I frame it, because the responsibility for what happened to Brittanee Drexel belongs entirely to Raymond Moody and Angel Voss. They made choices. They planned this. They acted on it. Brittanee did nothing wrong. But there are things worth talking about. She was 17 years old, alone in a city she didn't know, in a place that was actively chaotic and crowded with strangers, because the people she came with were older and kept leaving her behind. That shouldn't have happened. Those friends should never have let her wander alone in that environment. If you care about someone, that's not something you do. She also went without her mother knowing where she was. And I'm not saying that to place any blame on Brittanee. She was a teenager doing what teenagers sometimes do. But it meant that when she disappeared, there was a delay in the response. It meant her mom was blindsided in the worst possible way. Open communication with the people who love you isn't about control. It's about having someone in your corner who knows exactly where to look if something goes wrong. And the initial police response, dismissing a missing 17-year-old as a probable runaway, not wanting to file the report, categorizing her as an endangered runaway even after they took it, that matters too. How many cases do we cover where the first response from law enforcement is some version of, "She probably just left"? Where the assumption of choice gets in the way of urgency. How different might this case have looked if those first hours had been treated with the seriousness they deserved? Brittanee Drexel deserved better. She deserved friends who didn't leave her alone. She deserved a faster police response. She deserved to get home. She had dreams. She wanted to model, become a nurse, build a family. She was 17. She had so much ahead of her. And Raymond Moody took all of it. He is serving life in prison. Angel Voss is serving 18 years. And Dawn Drexel carries her daughter's photo and her ashes around her neck, because that's what's left. Underscore 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 underscore. That is the case of Brittanee Drexel. If you've been following this from the beginning, thank you for staying with it. Cases like this one are heavy, and they stay with you, as they should. Leave your thoughts below. I'll see you next time on Blush and Blood.